Soon, we will witness the story of the Titanic ship and the sinking process. We will see the moment of collision from inside the ship, the iceberg that sank the Titanic, and the actual footage of the marks it left on the ship. Then, through an experiment, we will learn what the people who fell into the water experienced, and we will follow the truth. The sound you are hearing was the distress signal sent from the Titanic. Using telegraph, distress calls were sent to other ships via Morse code. The Titanic was slowly beginning to sink. At the telegraph station was a 25-year-old young man named Jack Phillips. He remained at his post until the communication room was flooded, behaving heroically until the very end. However, nothing he did could change the outcome. The Titanic was first discovered 73 years after it sank, and everything began with the discovery of the wreck. The mysterious story of the Titanic. It all started years ago in 1912, 111 years ago from today. A large headline was published, "Titanic to embark on its maiden voyage." The image of the ship and ticket prices were also printed in newspapers. The Titanic story was actually a challenge. The transatlantic passenger trade was highly competitive, with shipping lines vying to transport wealthy travelers and immigrants. Especially two companies were in fierce competition. The White Star Line was determined to build two ships that would break records while crossing the Atlantic. They wanted to respond to this challenge, but instead of building fast ships, they chose a different path. In 1908, they formed an army of workers, mostly Irish, with the aim of building a revolutionary passenger ship. It was to be the largest, most luxurious, and most comfortable ship ever designed. "We're not fast, but who wants to sail across the ocean while getting seasick?" they would say. Their motto was this. Their goal was to dominate the European-American crossing within 5 years. Finally, the enormous RMS Olympic was launched. It was the largest ship the world had ever seen, weighing 45,000 tons, and capable of carrying 1,000 passengers. Soon after, the company would launch another ship, the Titanic. Approximately 200,000 people gathered to witness Titanic's launch. When people saw it being launched, they felt as though the ground itself was moving rather than the ship. For those living at the time, this was an enormous ship. Just the anchors weighed 15 tons. The interior was decorated with the most luxurious furniture and fittings. Some thought that the money should have been spent on technology rather than on luxury, because at that time, 4 propeller ships with higher maneuverability were being built. However, the White Star Line was not interested in emphasizing Titanic's technology. On April 10, 1912, Titanic was set to depart for its maiden voyage from England. Its destination was New York. Under the command of Captain Smith, the ship left England around noon. It would first go to the French port of Cherbourg, then to Queenstown, and from there to New York. As the ship departed, operators were warned about possible icebergs during the southern crossing. These were typical warnings in the Atlantic and were often taken lightly. At 9:30 p.m., the Embessa, a ship ahead of the Titanic, reported seeing large icebergs along its route. However, the warning, though received by the operators, was never passed on to the captain because at that moment they were busy using the telegraph to send messages from first-class passengers to their family members waiting in New York. The weather had become very cold, as if the cold breath of death was somewhere nearby. The sea was like a sheet. Titanic had lookout posts known as crow's nests, and 2 lookouts would rotate every 2 hours. It was approaching midnight. The ship was sailing near Grand Banks. The lookout saw something indistinct ahead, and although it was too dark to identify clearly, it was an iceberg. Frederick, the lookout, rang the bell 3 times and called the bridge. First Officer Murdoch ordered to turn the ship hard to starboard. The ship was moving at only 40 kilometers per hour, but it was impossible to stop such a massive vessel. Just 37 seconds later, at 11:40 p.m., Titanic collided with the iceberg on the starboard side. The iceberg sliced through the ship, causing severe damage to the hull, tearing open 5 compartments, which began to fill with water. Captain Smith called for the ship's designer, Thomas, to assess the damage. When Thomas went below deck to inspect, his worst fear came true. 5 compartments were flooding, and 400 tons of water were pouring in every minute. The ship was beyond saving. They accepted that the ship was going to sink. The only thing left was to abandon ship quickly. Captain Smith ordered that women and children be given priority to board lifeboats. The passengers were awakened and informed that they had to evacuate. Panic swept through the ship. One of the necessary steps was to send out a distress signal. In times of danger, distress signals were sent to nearby ships via Morse code. However, during the voyage, the telegraph operators were more concerned with sending first-class passengers personal messages than with dealing with routine messages. They even charged passengers for these services and didn't want to deal with ordinary messages. During the voyage, various ships sent warnings and messages. For example, the Californian, which was farther north, reported being unable to move forward due to icebergs and decided to spend the night where it was. Just before going to bed, the Californian's operator, Evans, sent a message to Titanic, warning them to be cautious of icebergs, as they could not move ahead due to heavy ice. However, Titanic's operator, Philip, was so overwhelmed with messages that he responded, "Shut up, I'm busy right now." Later, Captain Smith personally ordered the operators to urgently send a distress call. The operators could reach ships within a 400-mile range, but no response came from the nearby Californian. Only a distant ship replied. They were told to contact another nearby ship. They waited for a response from another ship, and the Carpathia, far away, responded to the distress call. However, it would take the Carpathia 4 hours to reach them, and the Titanic only had 2 hours left. By then, it was clear that no help could arrive in time. The ship's forward section was completely submerged, and the aft was rising into the air. At 1:15 a.m., the Californian's officer noticed a flare being shot from Titanic, but due to a lack of clarity in maritime regulations at the time, Captain Lord was confused about whether the flares indicated distress. He instructed his crew to continue monitoring and to continue sending Morse code distress signals to other ships. He then returned to his bed. At 1:50 a.m., 3 more flares were shot from Titanic, but the Californian's officer just noted that the ship's rear end was lifted at a 45-degree angle. By 2:15 a.m., the Titanic had vanished from view. By 5:30 a.m., a ship, the Carpathia, arrived at the scene. They were able to rescue survivors, but tragically, many lives had already been lost. After Titanic sank, the Carpathia's crew reported seeing the marks left on the iceberg and the damages caused by the collision. The iceberg had already caused significant damage, and if Captain Lord had reacted earlier, many more lives could have been saved. Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m., and by dawn, the remaining survivors were left to witness the devastating aftermath. 1,500 people, mostly men and lower-class passengers, perished, including Captain Smith, who had planned to retire after this voyage. In the span of just a few hours, families who had talked, laughed, and kissed their children goodnight found themselves separated forever. Mothers would send their children to cold waters, and fathers would watch their families slip away. Some would be widowed, and children would be left without parents. None of them would ever forget that day. That was the brief story of the Titanic, but there are still many unknowns behind it. In the next segment, we'll look at Lord Manel's reports and experiments. We will also see the actual marks left by the iceberg that struck Titanic